Lord, we thank you for this day. We pray that you will watch over us this day, Lord. We just pray for friends and family who are ill now. I pray that you will heal them quickly, restore them to full health as soon as possible. Protect them, protect us, and give us discernment and wisdom to live in a rather chaotic world, I guess is the best way to say it. Just bless our time here together today, Lord, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, I didn't do an update last week because I had a cold. My voice was a little bit affected. I did preach, I guess you would call it, first hour today. Do you not know these things? Do you not understand these things about some of the prophecies and other things related to the birth of Jesus the Messiah? Over 2,000 years ago. So if you want to catch that, you can get that on our YouTube channel. Here are some other places that you can find us. That might be rtntv.org, by the way. And I don't post things there, but so I know other people do. So that's another alternative. Last week we didn't stream our services, our first hour, because YouTube gave us a strike for a video that I did back in November, which blocked us from posting for 7 days. That expired on December 17th. I appealed it, and as best I can tell, the appeal was denied. I mean, YouTube is such a wonderful company to go back and forth with. You never talk to a person. You don't even know if you're talking to a person ever. And the video never came back, so I assumed that it was not approved. That is because I'm pretty sure what happened was I played a clip of an interview with one of the people who are considered a super spreader of misinformation. So I won't mention that person's name. It was a phenomenal interview. You should get this person's book. I saw some interviews with him this week, and I've been skeptical of this person. I've not always been a fan, but I have to say I think the work done in his book is extraordinary. It's extraordinarily well documented, and you can tell that he must be hitting close to the target because no one in the mainstream media will interview him or talk to him or even acknowledge that it's the best-selling book on one of the book-selling platforms, on many of book-selling platforms. And they don't even acknowledge it at places like the New York Times. I mean, we're living in this crazy information age. So today I'm going to build on, our president has a tendency to use the word exponentially. So it was discussed in a Facebook, by one of my Facebook friends, and someone suggested, well, maybe we should call it explodentially. So I won't name that person by name. He knows who he is or she is. I don't want to embarrass him by giving him credit in case I mess this up badly. But so we'll call it happening explodentially. I like to make up words. I used to love that comedian, Norm Crosby, who did those malaprops. Sometimes I do that unintentionally. I one time referred to Bruce Jenner as Bruce Gender. And I didn't plan it, it just popped out of my mouth that way. So I have a tendency that way. We talk about the convergence of events, how things seem to be happening very rapidly. The people that I know who also do prophecy updates and news reports, looking at the news and trying to do it from a Bible prophecy perspective, all of them are saying it's just impossible to keep up. So I will say it really is impossible to keep up. I usually try to organize these things into categories, but because I had to preach or talk first hour today, I just ran out of time. And my update today is not organized, so it's going to jump around all over the place. So in the event that you can't understand it, I I'll try to organize it better next week, but it was just, I always get up at 2 or 3 o'clock on Sunday mornings to finish up. And it was one of these things where there were about 40 things that I had wanted to talk about that I had not yet done a slide on. And so, 3 hours later, 3.5 hours later, I'm still trying to put things in order. And I finally just gave up because it's just too much stuff this week to keep up with. So this is the grid that I use, the prophecy ACLU, I call it. Acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. These are all things I think that we see happening in terms of things coming together. It's happening very quickly. It's all happening at the same time. We also know that there are things that have to be put in place for these things to happen. And I use the eye chart. It's interesting. I went to the eye doctor a couple weeks ago, and I needed a new prescription. And on the way out, he saw me, he goes, how's that look? And I said, it's a male, and I said, I love your dress. Because I was joking like I couldn't see, but the one thing I noticed was I can see so much more clearly that I actually walked out of there, and I told him, I was like, I feel like I'm 2 inches shorter because everything on the ground looks so much clearer, like I'm closer to it. But we know that this, as we get closer to these things, we'll understand. And Daniel 12 talks about the wise shall understand. So I may touch on some things that I've talked about before, and I've done a couple interviews over the last couple weeks, and I may have talked about those. Pablo at Serpents and Doves, David Fiorazo at Stand Up for the Truth, and some other things. And so I may have talked about this. I may have even touched on some of this stuff in my update. This is what always seems to be the predictive cover of The Economist. I saw a Twitter account, by the way. It's a parody satire account. It's called, it's based on the World Economic Forum, and I'll talk a little bit about them today. The Twitter handle is the World Ecommunist Forum. I thought it was very, very, a brilliant, it was so good, I wish I had thought of it. So let's, but you'll notice on there's a couple things that are interesting in this cover from The Economist, The World Ahead 2022. You see Xi of China, you see Joe Biden, you see a microscope here on the right, implying that there's things coming with, I think, DNA alteration. Talk a little bit about that today. Wind farms, of course, the coronavirus up in the upper right-hand side. Left-hand side, you see a camera. That might be a medical thing as well. But then these little symbols that you see in there, of course, you have the needles. I think we all know what that indicates. And then there's also these little symbols for Bitcoin, which is kind of a big deal. And who knows where this whole thing is going with regard to Bitcoin and that type of thing. And I might have some comments on that. So this Omicron, or you can switch the letters around and come up with another word. Without going into, I'm going to do an update on the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. It would only be on Rumble because we won't get banned on Rumble. And we do want to preserve our YouTube account. But this Omicron thing is being touted as like the worst thing ever. South Africa has, where it started, by all estimates, I think has dropped all their restrictions because it wasn't that serious. But you get to Germany, Austria, other places, they're just shutting everything down again. It's interesting, in the UK, they did this vote, which I thought was very troubling. The Boris Johnson administration is having problems. The government is having problems. Last year, when they had everybody locked down from holiday parties and Christmas visits and that type of thing, it's now come out that number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister residence, had at least 7 major parties because it's okay for them. And this is the thing, is this divide that's happened between the elites and others. There was a person appointed to investigate that in the UK, and that person resigned today because he had a party himself. This is, you understand, I mean, it's almost hard to talk about because it's unbelievable what they're doing. It really is unbelievable what they're doing. Whether you agree with that thing for Charlie Vector 019 or not, it's clear that people are using this to impose social control. And in the UK this week, they voted, it was about 370 to 102. They approved vaccine passports in the UK that'll be implemented. And they're like, like government runs so well that they're gonna do something like this and using technology. But I think they've been planning this for a while, and I'll have more to say about that when I do my Rumble thing, because I've been investigating some other things about some of the wargaming they had for a coming pandemic. And it's becoming clear that in the war games, what they didn't discuss, they discussed a lot of things, but they didn't discuss how to treat the medical treatment for whatever was coming. They discussed how to control the information flow. That's what they were really concerned about. And they dedicated whole sessions at those. And they've been doing these wargaming sessions for quite some time. They started back in the mid-2000s. There was another one that was in 2018. And they're all sponsored by the same people, Johns Hopkins Medical Security Policy, or whatever they call it, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the World Economic Forum, and the Rockefeller Foundation. So the government in the UK is really, it's in trouble. Because a lot of people have just had it. They had an election for a parliament seat Friday or Saturday, and it was one that had been a conservative seat for 200 years, and the non-conservative won. Because people have just had it with the hypocrisy of the Boris Johnson government. This editorial cartoon in the Times of London, I thought, was one of the more brilliant ones that I've seen. Number 10 Downing Street, you get it, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Brilliant thing. But this is the Times of London this morning. Omicron sends fewer patients to the hospital than the Delta variant, but they're shutting everything down. You know, here's a picture. All we want for Christmas is a booster. And everywhere, how many of you are just a little bit tired of hearing about all of this? I mean, it's just constant. And part of it is, I think, a social control thing. I mean, here's a proposed law in New York. I mean, they've shut everything down there. It's vaccine passports. We were supposed to go to a concert at The Shot the other night. Interestingly, it's called The Shot. And you can't get in unless you have a certificate of the state that you've received the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er, and that you're fully treated. Although what's the definition of fully treated? Because that's like ever-changing. or you could have a negative PCR test, and then you can go to the concert. And it's sort of like, is it really worth it? I was looking up a thing I'll talk about in a minute. It's at the Morgan Library. It's at 36th and Fifth Avenue in New York City. 56th or 36th and Madison Avenue in New York City. It's the J. Pierpont Morgan Library, his collection. It's a phenomenal collection. I mean, the guy was, uber wealthy. But there, you can't get in unless you show that you've had the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. And they've completely divided society. And this is a law that's been proposed in New York. Now, this law was first proposed back in 2015 during the Ebola outbreak. Just to summarize it, it's been reintroduced. It's reintroduced every year. It never gets anywhere. And immediately all the fact checkers say, well, it never gets anywhere, so why are you worried about it? You're just a crazy person even talking about it. And I'm like, if it doesn't mean anything, why do you keep introducing it before the legislature every year? And eventually they'll wear you down to where you don't pay attention and they'll pass it maybe. Do you think that might happen? And essentially it says if there's a health emergency, they'll be able to send out the National Guard, who, by the way, is being deployed at hospitals here in Ohio. They'll send out the National Guard, and they'll be authorized to take you to a quarantine facility for up to 90 days. And I'm reading these stories out of the UK. So the UK restricted travel from South Africa. So people that were sort of in transit from South Africa, they get to the UK and they find they have to go to a quarantine hotel. And these are like old hotels that were ready to close down that they've taken over. They're in bad shape. You're stuck there for like 10 to 14 days. The food is terrible, and you have to pay the bill. So some of the people who came back from South Africa, they've been hit with bills of thousands of dollars, thousands of pounds. Now they've lifted the restrictions on South Africa where Omicron started, but they're locking down the UK. And listen, I don't think this thing is anything to be trivialized. I want that to be understood. I mean, as in our case, we didn't have sense of taste and smell for months. And it's very disconcerting to eat a piece of chocolate and a piece of steak and not be able to tell which is which, except maybe by texture. And that lasts in our case. And it's still, every now and then, we have issues with it. So I don't think it's trivial. And I have a nephew who's in ICU, been in ICU for, I think, 4 to 7 weeks now, in bed. Hasn't seen his daughters, his wife and mother can come in and see him one at a time, occasionally. I had another friend on Facebook whose husband was in the hospital. They brought him home and he passed away yesterday. I think they would be in their 60s. So it's nothing to be trivialized with. I know a lot of people who've had it severely, have recovered, and they're still struggling months later with lung issues and that type of thing. So it's nothing to be trivialized, but it's just something that seems to be constant. I mean, here's a article in, if you could zoom out, in the Arab News today. And it says pandemic with no end, ? And the answer is, I don't know that some things are, I'm 67, so I don't know if some things are going to end in my lifetime. And by the way, I'd love to bring you positive, upbeat news. I told somebody the other day that I'm glad I had the week off last week, even though it was forced, because I just think the winter gloom is symbolic of the things that I'm reading in the newspaper. I mean, this is Central Ohio, and the sun has now disappeared. May not see it again until March. I went out the other day at 2 in the afternoon to go someplace, and the automatic lights we have on the outside of our house were on in the middle of the day. It's very disconcerting. And we're just being fed a line of baloney. So they had a White House thing for democracy, Summit for Democracy. During the Summit for Democracy, this person, who is a minister for Taiwan, put up a map. And the map shows Taiwan as open and green, as opposed to red China and Vietnam and other places in Southeast Asia. What do you think our esteemed, freedom-loving White House did? They cut her feed. Somebody grabbed a screenshot of this before it went away. Because they did not want to offend the Chinese. And it's just this control thing everywhere. Here is this is good news. This is the bright spot. Okay, good news. Salih Omarova, who was appointed for comptroller of the currency, aka controller of the economy. She grew up in Kazakhstan. She's a Marxist. Of course, she'll deny that she's a Marxist, even though her papers support it. She gaslights everybody. She's the one that Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, when he questioned her at her confirmation hearing, said, I don't know whether to call you professor or comrade. I like that guy. I like the way he kind of boils it right down to its essence. She's withdrawn her nomination. So there was word that she was going to, but I never trust, the White House kind of floats these ideas out there, and until she actually withdraws, I never trust it. Of course, there's a host of people behind her that shouldn't be serving in our government if we're concerned about freedom. So maybe they put her up as cover for some of these other lunatics that they want to nominate. And again, this is going to be a bit disjointed, so I apologize for that. This is a California school board meeting, Salinas, California, where parents have said that their children in elementary school and middle school have been coached into joining LGBTQ club. I mean, the things that are going on there are just absolutely horrific. And they've suspended the teachers who were involved. I don't think they've issued any kind of apology or anything for these people. A mixed crowd of more than 150 people packed a school board meeting at Salinas, California on December 15th as frustrated parents clashed with supporters of two teachers accused of subverting parents and recruiting middle school students into a gay-straight alliance club. Jessica Conan, one of about 30 people who spoke during an extended public comment period, told the board that school staff indoctrinated her child and usurped her parental authority. She blasted the board and accused teachers and staff of coaching her gender dysphoric daughter through the Equality Club. She says here, I stand here today in front of you all because I am outraged. Is this really barely coming to light? Are you guys serious? How could you even allow this? How could you even have this meeting to question it? How dare you let these teachers come in and act as if they have done nothing wrong? A mistake? How long of a mistake? And people are upset this is happening at school boards all over the country. There's also, have you heard about and I have to find this one, so I'm going to exit out of my program, because this is a similar story. Again, I thought I had this. No, I didn't. I didn't think I had this organized. Here it is. This is from the University of Pennsylvania. Have you heard about this? This guy on the right, he was a second-team All-League Ivy League swimmer. Now listen, it's the Ivy League, so they're not likely world-class athletes. You know, they're students, by and large. They're supposed to be elite students. So for 3 years, he swam on the male team, took a year off, supposedly took hormone suppression therapy, and now has come back and swimming as a woman. So he swam at a meetup at the University of Akron, and he won everything. He's breaking all the records. In fact, if you look at the records, when he was Will, you know, what's he doing as Will, what's he's doing at Leah, and how does it relate to the NCAA record? You'll see that he's close to the NCAA female record in a number of categories, and he's winning races by 38 seconds, half a pool and a half length. And the thing is that none of the students are really speaking out. Why? Because they're afraid to speak out. And they've told people privately, if they speak out and people find out about it, they will not be able to get jobs when they leave school. And it's distressing them. I've heard that they're standing there before the race when he's competing, and he is he's bragging about it. And they're crying because they know there's no chance that they can beat him. And I'm using him intentionally. So some of the parents wrote to the University of Pennsylvania, and they got this back. We've encouraged our student athletes to utilize the robust resources available to them at Penn, and I'd like to share them with you as well. Counseling and psychological. In other words, if you're complaining, this is what the Penn administration is recommending. We have counseling and psychological services, the LGBT Center, restorative practices, and our Center for Student Athlete Success staff. And the coach doesn't complain, as one of the swimmers said in a off-the-record interview. He wants to win. And he's going to win with this guy. Yeah. But why it's just terrible. So on Tucker the other night, he interviewed a feminist. This is a feminist, left-wing. Here's what she had to say about the situation.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I mean, a lot of us saw this coming down the pike. There's a woman named Beth Stelzer who founded an organization called Save Women's Sports several years ago. She's going to be speaking with your colleague, Laura Ingram, later tonight. Many of us saw this coming, and it's just very important that we all understand that situations like what we're seeing in Pennsylvania at the University of Pennsylvania are not anomalous. This is happening all over the country, as I know you know. A lot of people are saying things. A lot of parents are speaking out. I think a lot of students are very scared of speaking out because saying, look, this isn't appropriate. We shouldn't have men competing in women's sports is a very unpopular thing to say. The other thing I just want to say is very often this is framed as having so-called transgender athletes participating in women's sports. And I really want us to get away from that language. The truth of the matter is that he is a man, and he's been allowed to compete in women's sports. Part of the problem is that a lot of this is happening because of a series of orders that the Biden administration issued over the course of the first 6 months of the administration, impacting Title IX, among other federal administrative laws. And it essentially says that throughout federal administrative law, the word sex has to be redefined to include the words gender identity. And that is a disaster for women and girls, including the women who are on the UPenn women's swimming team. Well, so there is currently a lawsuit pending that was filed by 20 states, and I'm proud to say that the U.S. chapter of the Women's Human Rights Campaign submitted a brief in that case arguing that redefining sex to include the nebulous, nonsensical concept of gender identity also constitutes sex discrimination. And so I'm very happy to be involved in that lawsuit. But I also just want to note that what I unpack in the book shows that this goes far beyond sports. So we're seeing, for example, and we've talked about this before too, states like California, Washington, and other states across the country are allowing convicted male rapists and murderers to be housed in women's prisons on the basis of their so-called gender identity. We're seeing the total invasion of women's spaces, prisons, bathrooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, and sports by men on the basis of their so-called female gender identity. And what I really want everyone to understand is that words like gender identity don't have any meaning. They really don't. I mean, they're defined variously, inconsistently, and vaguely in ways that don't make any sense. Every single human being is either a male person or a female person. Everything else is a lie.
Man, if you ever have an hour, I'd love to sit down and just hear what your life has been like since you started saying obvious truths like that on television. I think you paid a big cost. We'd love to hear about it at some point. Anyway, in the meantime, thank you.
Well, if I could just make one plea.
Yeah.
Can I make one plea to your
course.
viewers? Okay, so I have one plea to make, which is this. As Tucker knows, I'm a registered Democrat, as he said in my introduction. I have made common cause with many Republicans who are fighting back against so-called gender identity ideology. One thing that has frustrated me is that across the political spectrum, people still seem to be of the view that the phrase transgender people, the phrase transgender athlete, the phrase transgender student, the phrase transgender prisoner has some sort of coherent meaning. It doesn't. And so my plea to your viewers in particular, I know that it's Republicans who are holding the line. I don't like it, but I know it's true. Republicans are holding the line on material reality. All of that goes out the window when you use a word like transgender. It just totally doesn't exist. And I'm begging viewers to stop using it. Thank you so much.
So smart. The language matters. Karadanski, thank you so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here.
Okay, so that's good. I applaud her. I'm sure that, I don't even know if I can mention Naomi's last name at the risk of being banned. You need to look her up because she is just. When I do my Rumble thing, I'll play some clips of her. We got blocked or a strike on YouTube because I used a clip of hers previously. The rolling out of these vaccine passports is just frightening. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And since I'm on this slide, so this has made its way through the Bible prophecy community with very rapidly. This is the UN Plaza in New York City. If you've been there and you've seen the sculpture about the beatings or the engraving there on the wall about the beating swords and the plowshares. This is known as the International Guardian of Peace and Safety. And so when you see this, a lot of people are like, this is Bible prophecy being fulfilled and that type of thing. And so I'll admit, I was a little bit skeptical. It's from an artist in Oaxaca, Mexico. And if you know anything about Oaxaca, besides there was a restaurant called Oaxaca in Sedona. I remember they had really good Mexican food. So I assume there's good Mexican food in Oaxaca, Mexico. But they have that Cave of the Dead, in that Cave of the Dead celebration. So there's this kind of celebration of death in that city that is a little bit off the charts in the way it's concerning. And so they have this thing here, and everybody says, that's Bible prophecy. That's Revelation 13. And so they say this, the guardian is a fusion of a jaguar and eagle, considering that strong animals that are very representative in our pre-Hispanic and national history. And it's really based on some of the imagery that come from the Aztecs. And the Aztecs were a pretty bloody people, child sacrifice and all that, which is why it's concerning that they're using Aztec war chants in California schools now. I played clips of these. I mean, a lot of people say, Hal, you're just crazy. I'm just giving you what the facts are. You can do with them what you want. Why are they teaching this to our kids? Well, other than the fact that it's California. And so the artist By the way, the artists have an interesting name. It's Jacoba, like Jacob and Mary Angelus are the artists. Jacob and Mary, the messenger, and angel, messenger. And so everybody's like, this is Bible prophecy. And it does sort of fit a little bit. I was skeptical, though. I even said so, that I wasn't sure that it was that significant. But it's there at the UN now, the International Guardian for International Peace and Security. Jacobo and Maria Angelus donated it. And so people say it's Revelation 13. And it says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. And then they jump down to verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave his authority and power and seat and great authority. And so everybody, but they miss out the other part. It says, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his 10 horns crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So they look at verse 2 and say, look, this is the fulfillment of Revelation 13. And I don't think that it is. I mean, you can look at the statue and you can see that it is a winged jaguar. And when you look at, I think Daniel 7 is more likely a indication. I didn't get the verse in for Daniel 7, but it talks about a lion with eagle's wings. And so that does seem to have some similarity. I mean, they use jaguar, the Bible uses lion, so maybe there's some similarity there. And it is kind of a fierce-looking statue. So the other night I did Prophecy Roundtable with Doug Hamp and Scott Harwell, and I mentioned that I was originally not too impressed with this, and Doug brought up some images that are in his one of his Corrupting the Images books, and he goes back to ancient Babylonian, Assyrian, and Akkad Empire imagery. And if you want to see this stuff, you can go to the British Museum, and there are panels of relief, pictures of the Assyrian Empire. When we were at the British Museum a few years ago, they were doing a special exhibit called I Am Ashurbanipal, King of Assyria, King of the World. And I'm sort of like, I'm in London, they're one of the big financial exchanges at this great British museum. And I'm like, and they have a thing like the guy's identifying himself as King of the World. King of Assyria, King of the World. And Doug's point is that this imagery in ancient Assyrian and Babylonian thought will, he thinks, come back in the end times. And he looks at Nimrod and Ishtar and that type of thing. And from the Akkad Empire, this is about 2300 BC. This is a picture of Ishtar, a woman riding the beast. And do you see what the beast looks like there? And that's off of a cylinder. So that's sort of a flattened out version of a cylinder like this. And this is what it looks like. And it does bear some resemblance to what you see at the UN Plaza. And it is interesting that appears now at this particular time in history with all the other things going on, as if we didn't have enough stuff to worry about. So I just think it's one of those things. I don't think it's the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but it is at the UN. And a lot of people think the UN plays into this end time world government structure. And it's there. So do with it what you want. As I said, I think it's somewhat important. The other thing that I think is, somebody in church was at the men's room at the Old Worthington Public Library the other day. In the men's room, okay, do you see what that says? Changing the world one cycle at a time. It's menstrual products in the men's room at the Worthington Public Library. Do you understand that this is local stuff? And so when Dennis Prager goes on, Bill Maher, and says that, the stupidity of the left is that they say that not just women menstruate, they laugh at him like, nobody believes that on the left. What do you mean they don't believe it on the left? They implement it on the left. They're gaslighting you all the time. Stuff is happening and they say it doesn't mean anything. I'm trying to remember what this letter is. Oh, so Whitley County, Indiana, Columbia City. I have family that lives there. It's 18 miles from where I went to college. Some guy was complaining about what was going on at the school, at a school board meeting, and what was being taught. So now he receives a letter from this attorney at this law firm, by the way, who also happens to be on the school board, the attorney, and they've hired this law firm to investigate. How do you think that's going to go? And so here's what he says in the letter. In my capacity as legal representative of Whitley County Consolidated Schools, you are hereby advised and directed, written to Damian Stafford, henceforth and until advised to the contrary, all communications, contact of whatsoever nature between you and any of all administrators, faculty, and staff at Whitley County Community Schools shall be directly through my office. In other words, you are to immediately cease and desist all communications or contact directly or indirectly with or to the employees of this school system except through my office. And he gives his email there. So this parent can't even call his kids' teachers. That's that's Whitley County. That's a rural county. I mean, you get outside of Columbia City, and Columbia City's no big metropolis. It's where I bought my first new car. Pam and I bought our first new car there. But it's sort of like, and it's not a one-stop-like town, okay? It's like 15, depending on if you go both directions, east and west and north and south. But so this stuff is happening everywhere. I want to alert you to a very good article that is Joe Allen, who writes at Singularity Weekly and elsewhere. He has an article at Salvo this week called Chipped Hands, Chipped Heads, the Dark Future of Bioimplants. Now, last week I played you a clip, or 2 weeks ago I played you a clip of a guy named Elon Musk. You might have heard of him. By the way, he's just paid about $13 billion in taxes, which is like more than anybody's ever paid in any 1 year. And it's sort of like, oh, so he's not going to eat out now? I was doing an analysis of the fortune of Bezos or Bill Gates or somebody, and I figured out they were worth about $150 billion at the time. And I figured if they spent they could buy like a 10,000 square foot house a day, each day for 7 years or something like that. If the house price was $1.5 million. I mean, they're very wealthy. And there's no way to spend it all. And I often wonder, so they tax them at 90%, so it's not going to affect their lifestyle much. But we don't tax wealth, we tax income and capital gains. So he sold stock, and that's why he's getting taxed. But a couple weeks ago, I played a clip of him saying that we've sort of we're past the tipping point on artificial intelligence and what it's going to be. So he's sort of giving this warning, but then there's a clip of him saying, by 2022, we're going to have chip implant. By the fall of 2022, we will have chip implants in brains. Neuralink is his company. And you will see that there are Time Magazine and other places have declared him, Financial Times and Time Magazine, have declared Musk to be the man of the year. He's not getting man of the year because he has a cool electric car or an electric truck coming out. He's man of the year because of the artificial intelligence aspect and the Neuralink. That's what he's getting. And so they're telling you that this is what is important to them. And so while he does issue a warning, at the same time he comes out and he sort of spills the beans about this. So Joe Allen has a great article. Here's what he says in his article at Salvo. Chipped hands, chipped heads. The potential for top-down technocratic control should be obvious. Militarized superpowers love that concept. Until Elon Musk started pumping cash into brain-computer interface projects, DARPA, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, had been the primary funding source of BCI, biochip implants, brain chip implants, going back for 60 years. He also cites a British defense study, Ministry of Defense, called Human Augmentation, the dawn of a new paradigm. It says in there things like this: human augmentation will become increasingly relevant, partly because it can directly enhance human capability and behavior, and partly because it is the binding agent between people and machines. Future wars will be won not by those with the most advanced technologies, but by those who can effectively integrate the unique capabilities of both people and machines. And so here's a page from that article, Understanding Human Augmentation. Look at the picture that they use on that page and the common, thing about the evolution of man, and you see where this is going. And I'm someone who has artificial joints, so I'm all for, some technology, but I'm not sure I want a chip in my brain. They're calling it, this is some of the things that they're looking at, but you see on the right, and here they have human performance enhancement, and what do they have down here at the bottom? Gene edited for enhanced sight. This is how people have vision. But they're talking about gene editing, and they're also talking about certain other things that are very much talked about in the world today, the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. And it says here, human augmentation is founded on very personal data. And look at some of the images that they use in this British report as to where this is going. And this is coming very quickly. Now, how successful they'll be is anybody's guess, but with the growth of computing power, it may come about very, very quickly, because there used to be a thing called Moore's Law, and in this area of artificial intelligence, they're increasing computing power and computational ability much faster than Moore's Law. And then if you throw quantum computing in on that, this is very difficult stuff to like. Here's the final report of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence by the United States government. Back to the British thing, here's a couple quotes out of that. There may be a moral obligation to augment people, particularly in cases where it promotes well-being or protects us from novel threats. Do you see the terminology, novel threats? Do we have that terminology used elsewhere in today's society, culture, and world? It could be argued that treatments involving novel processes and gene and cell therapies are examples of human augmentation already in the pipeline. The history of demonstrates how proven and seemingly uncontroversial human augmentation technologies can take many years to become globally effective and accepted by societies. And I would add, so this was written last year, and I would say mandated by societies. One company has so far developed a neurosurgery robot capable of implanting flexible polymer threads into the human brain with micron precision in a 45-minute procedure. The technology is currently being used for research on rodents and is intended as a prototype for human use. In the Fourth Industrial Revolution book, back in about 2016, our favorite guy, Klaus Schwab, said implanted devices will likely also help to communicate thoughts normally expressed verbally through a built-in smartphone and potentially unexpressed thoughts or moods. Now, if you've ever had someone say to you, I know what you're thinking. Well, now everybody will know what you're thinking. And there's a book out, this is also from the World Economic Forum, The Internet of Bodies, Opportunities, Risk, and Governance. So this is I think an investment vehicle publication. You can buy, I've not downloaded, I downloaded the cover, but it costs $4,964. So I thought I would pay, and it's only 60 pages long. So only Elon Musk can afford that kind of stuff. But here's another publication. This comes from June of 2020, a white paper that I pulled off the World Economic Forum website. And it says, Reimagining Regulation for the Age of AI, the New Zealand Pilot Project. So you can download that if you want, email me and I'll send you a copy of it. But this is a structural outline for how they're going to implement AI in New Zealand and trying to do it to be the first country in the world to implement it. And when you look at what's going on in all these countries with the social control, the quarantine camps and places in Australia, this is very disconcerting. And the proposed legislation in New York, which I don't know if it'll pass. Let's say it doesn't pass. Somebody thought of it, and we've had plenty of things. Just because it's not going to pass the legislature doesn't mean there's some lunatic health department person who will put it in place. We've seen that in our own state. At the Oxford Union, they were talking about having a debate with an AI computer. An AI computer questions its own right to exist. It's kind of an interesting article. By the way, you can read that in the Times of London. And this Ghislaine Maxwell trial about Jeffrey Epstein, the defense is rested, so that's going to be going to the jury Monday or Tuesday, and we'll see what the verdict is. The case went much more quickly than anybody thought. I think the defense had some problems because some of the people making allegations were found not to have been under the age of consent when these things happened. They were actually old enough to consent to them, which is always a problem in prosecuting these cases. So I'm not convinced she's going to be convicted, but we'll see what happens. But the defense rested. Prosecution finished weeks sooner than expected. And by the way, former FBI Director Comey's daughter is the lead prosecutor on the case. I'm just throwing that out there. Don't know if it has any significance or not. Well, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. Let me talk about 2 or 3 things. So this is an editorial on the left in the Haaretz, which is a left-wing magazine, and they're saying no to expanding the Golan settlement. And then they had an op-ed response to that a few days later saying developing the Golan is wrong now too, because Naftali Bennett has proposed doubling the Israeli population of the Golan. And this person in the editorial said, well, I've driven in the Golan. The roads are narrow and all this other stuff. So why are we not, we need to do things so there's equality in the Golan. And I've driven those roads. They're very narrow as you come out of Majel Shams and go over towards Nahariya on the coast. You've got some very narrow roads. It's like one-lane roads that are really bi-direct, they're traffic coming both directions. And when there are buses on there, and these buses drive like crazy people. So the other thing that happened this week is that about a week ago, a book came out. It's in Hebrew by Barak Ravid, who's a man of the left. He was talking about Trump's piece. And he interviewed Trump at Mar-a-Lago and then on the phone a couple times over the last year. He's written up in the book, and now everybody is upset about this because Trump came out, and I'm just relating to you what the book says, but it seems to be confirmed by other people's interviews about like Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz, who worked on the Trump peace plan and the Abraham Accords, that during the announcement of the Trump peace plan in January 2020, during that announcement, Netanyahu spoke. And when he spoke, he said, okay, we saw the plan. The plan gives us the Jordan Valley and the settlements and parts of the West Bank, parts of Judea and Samaria, and we're going to go ahead with annexation. And during that announcement, Trump kind of looked off stage, and now Trump's really upset with Netanyahu. Their relationship is pretty much fractured. In the interview, Trump said, I'm very upset with Bibi. He was the first person to congratulate Joe Biden on winning the presidency. And then he used an expletive about blank him. This is a man of the left, and it's not true that he was not the first person to congratulate Biden. And he's the prime minister of Israel. He has to protect Israel's interests, not the interest of whoever's occupying the presidency in the United States. He has to deal with them. Caroline Glick has a great article today, Friday, in Israel Hayom newspaper. And in that article, just let me read a little bit of what she says. Well, in the forward article, so the people that were on the Trump peace team that were doing the Trump plan, which came out on the morning of January 28th, 2020. And Bill Koenig, by the way, did a great presentation at the Pre-Trib Study Group conference. And he and I have talked about this, and he has pretty much nailed down that, Bill's sort of passion is when the U.S. does something with regard to Israel, bad things happen in the United States. So we've had these tornadoes, and Bill's working through some things on that and may have something to say about that in the future. But with regard to the Trump peace plan that was released in January 28th, 2020, it was that afternoon that Peter Navarro and others at the White House were hit with this COVID thing. And everything changed. Now, a lot of people have said, well, the Trump peace plan was dead on arrival. The Palestinians were not going to accept it. But if you look at what Trump said, Ravid says that Trump said that Mahmoud Abbas really wanted peace, and he liked him. He was like a grandfather. Now, this is troubling if this is true. Let's admit it. And a lot of people said, well, the Palestinians will never accept that, so don't worry about it. But the plan did say two-state solution. It was crystal clear that the U.S. government, the Trump administration, was proposing a two-state solution. I don't like that. Some people poo-pooed it. I think it was a very big deal. And now when you listen to Kushner and Avi Berkowitz in some of the interviews in the Forward and Times of Israel and elsewhere, it appears that this actually was the Trump goal, was a two-state solution. And then that was followed by the Abraham Accords. So here's a little bit of an interview discussion between David Wormser, who's really one of the best analysts out there, and another person I have a lot of respect for, Caroline Glick, on her podcast the other day, about what does all of this mean? Is this a big deal or not? Now, Caroline's take is that it makes Netanyahu look better, because Netanyahu was kind of standing up to the pressure from the Trump administration, which seems to be very similar to the pressure that the Israeli government is now getting from the Biden administration. In fact, Secretary of State Blinken and some of the Israeli defense establishment people met to discuss the Iran issue recently. And what was the most important thing to Blinken? Hey, you Israelis, you shouldn't be building settlements in these areas. That was as important, maybe more important to him than the Iranian nukes. So this is a recapitulation of, this is a reincarnation of the Obama administration. This is what we're seeing. So anyway, here's a few minutes of Wormser and Caroline Glick talking about what this might mean.
But at this particular moment, the Prime Minister Netanyahu really had no choice, in my view. So combined with what happened to Pence, in addition to the fact that the Prime Minister did what had to be done as the Prime Minister, and the President, I don't think, fully understood the nature of the office, either his or Netanyahu's, I think that was a train wreck that was inevitable. That train wreck then probably left the president very bitter and made him wonder, in retrospect, much more about the peace process and why his vision of the grand deal, the deal of the century, never really materialized. Which is frustrating, because the president did deliver the only real peace treaty that was possible to deliver, which was the Abraham Accords. He did deliver for Israel a lot of Israel's interest. By the way, Israel doesn't necessarily, I cannot overstate how much I appreciate President Trump for recognizing Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. There's no doubt in my mind that he still will go down as a great president for those things. But that said, the Jewish people, he didn't give it to the Jewish people. This is already the Jewish people's. It would have been theirs whether or not the United States, under any president, recognizes it. That is something that was given thousands of years ago.
You know, I couldn't agree more. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but it is just one of those things where, you know, I think, I mean, first of all, Trump didn't make Jerusalem Israel's capital. Like you said, Jerusalem has been Israel's capital for over 3,000 years. And I always felt very strongly, whether it was under the Obama presidency or the Trump presidency or any previous presidency, the Clinton presidency, when the Jerusalem Embassy Act was first passed and he signed it into law, that it really, you know, Israel shouldn't pay anything for U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, because, you know, whether or not Jerusalem is Israel's capital is not for the American president or even for Congress. They should recognize it because it's the decent and right thing to do. Having said that, on a strategic level, rather than on a level of national interest, that Israel shouldn't pay anything for something that is, you know, it's supposed to be just taken for granted. And if it isn't, that's the problem of the people who aren't taking it for granted, not Israel's problem. There was very significant, I mean, Trump's recognition of Jerusalem and later of the Golan Heights as part of sovereign Israel. Jerusalem is Israel's capital, and the Golan Heights as part of sovereign Israel has very strategic implications. I mean, you know, because mainly because there are implications of not recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. When you don't recognize Israel's capital as Jerusalem, what you're saying is that, you know, Israel is not, the Jews aren't the natives aren't indigenous to the Middle East, that the land of Israel is not their historic homeland. You're saying, you know, you're basically accepting an anti-Semitic narrative that says that the Jews are just, they're new. What the Palestinians say, that there's no relationship between the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and the nation of Israel, and the Jewish people, that they're two completely separate things, and that the Jews of Israel are actually colonizers from all other countries, but they're not. That Jerusalem is not their capital, and that Israel is not their historic homeland. So once Trump recognized that Jerusalem has always been Israel's capital, he paid that lie, and he said, no, Israel has nothing to do with colonialism whatsoever. So I think that was very important. And when you look at the Golan Heights, it's a different concept, and it's not as deep. Also, you have this country, Syria, whose leader is controlled by Iran, and he has engaged in genocide for over a decade of his own people. And he obviously poses a major strategic threat to Israel, and giving him the delusion that Israel is going to make itself vulnerable to destruction at his hand by giving up the Golan Heights, I think is crazy. So denying him that, I think, was a very important and very inexpensive step, for the Americans to take.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think Israel always has to remind itself what is the foundation of modern Israel legally, internationally. And it's the League of Nations mandate, and the League of Nations mandate recognized, it couldn't grant because it recognized the pre-existing right of the Jewish people.
And that comes from the 1920-21 San Remo conference 100 years ago. So I go and download her podcast and listen to it. It's very good. I want to mention this too, that a couple weeks ago I reported that the Biden administration came out with the mandates for the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er in companies above 100 employees. The Fifth Circuit came in and put an injunction against that because there was a whole bunch of cases filed. Those cases were all consolidated on appeal. They did a blind draw, and they selected the Sixth Circuit. In Ohio, we live in the Sixth Circuit. It's Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So it's largely considered one of the more conservative circuits. So everybody was excited about that. But then an Obama appointee judge and a George W. Bush appointee judge were on the three-person panel that heard that appeal in this case. And Friday, they issued an opinion overturning the Fifth Circuit. And so now there'll be an appeal either en banc. That means they'll appeal, instead of having three judges on the Sixth Circuit hear it, they'll ask all the judges on the Sixth Circuit to listen to the arguments in the case, or they may appeal directly to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court is not really reinstated. But this is really kind of fundamental as to what's going on, because it is a complete misapplication of the OSHA statutes, the way they've done it. It is just a complete government overreach. But you wouldn't expect an Obama appointee judge to have any appreciation of that fact. Things like statutory law, the Constitution, that type of thing are kind of irrelevant. So I think that you need to watch that. I won't play this speech in full. This is the head of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who was talking at a World Economic Forum thing a year ago. Well, listen to just a little bit of what she has to say, because it kind of relates to the mandate issue. This is from a year ago, November 17th, 2020, just after the US election. Whoops. There we go. Yeah, I'm not going to play it because it goes on. She also posted this on her Twitter account here the other day. Now, why is my stuff not playing? And she's talking about, this is this little thing they made up for the World Economic Forum, global gateway, infrastructure, climate change. But then look at what she uses here at about 25, 40 seconds in. as to what is sort of one of the big important things that they're doing in Europe, to forge new ones, to build back better after COVID-19. And by the way, when Biden was talking about on Hanukkah about the temple, he mentioned the temple and then talked about rebuilding the temple. The temple was the light to the Jewish people. And then he mentioned we're going to build back better. So this is the common theme. They're all trained at the same school or institute to say the same thing. Iran has issued a threat. I think I'll close with this just because we'll be here forever if I don't. So this was on the front page of the Jerusalem Post the other day. By the way, I do want you to know that within Turkey, they had a conference. This is the head of Hamas speaking in Istanbul on December 2nd, talking about one of the top things that Hamas needs to do is to get rid of the Zionist project. And this was done in Istanbul. So you need to understand how Turkey plays into all this. And then there was this explosion the other day. I think I might have mentioned this. Alma Israel, Alma Research and Education Center based in northern Israel, does a very good analysis of issues related to northern Israel and southern Lebanon. And they have this thing about how Hamas is growing in Lebanon. So this is another front that proxies that Iran is using in Lebanon. And they had a major explosion at a mosque this week. This was JCPA. Hamas is preparing to attack Israel from southern Lebanon. And then here is a picture of what's going on with the fire burning at the mosque. It exploded. And this was a Hamas weapons store under a mosque. You see how they embed things in human shields, a mosque? Now they're saying it was oxygen bottles, not weapons. So, okay, sure. Whatever you guys want to say, we'll believe that. But so understand, and this is Hamas meeting with Ayatollah Khamenei in 2019, and these are guys, one of the guys, the guy in the middle there on the left is, second from the left is, well, maybe it's the guy at the end of the couch. One of those two guys is the head of the Hamas delegation from Lebanon, meeting with Khamenei in 2019. So understand that this is something that they're doing. This was the publication in the Jerusalem Post the other day. It was a picture of the headline of the the Tehran Times, which said, just one wrong move. And it has a map of Israel. And it has essentially a target list of all the places that they intend to attack with rockets from Hamas in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon and elsewhere, and from Iran and Iraq. Now, one person in Israel said, no, that's not a target list. That's just a map of all the falafel joints in Israel. And that might be true because there are a ton of them. If you like falafel, you're in heaven there. But they're threatening, and this was another report, that Israel, to really engage in the attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities, Israel really needs tankers, because their tankers are pretty old, maybe 50 years old. And they were told that, well, there's back orders and you're not going to get any new ones till at least 2024. That's 3 years away. And they need those tankers to conduct an attack on the Iranian facilities. And here's this gas exploration to stop. This is what the Interior Oil Minister decided in Israel. Gas exploration to stop as focus shifts to renewals. So the green agenda is even collapsing Israel's great gas finds. There is an article that you should read. Well, the other thing you need to know is that there was a big tour this week by Mohammed bin Salman as he went around the Middle East. That's not a picture of it. Suffice it, here it is. And he went to all these countries in the Gulf Coast, among the Arab countries, some people called it a rehabilitation tour, showing that he's clearly in charge, which kind of leads me to believe, you understand he's very close to Jared Kushner. And Kushner wanted the two-state solution, and Mohammed bin Salman would like to get control of the Temple Mount. And he might be amenable to some changes on the Temple Mount if he gets enough power. And he's going around the Gulf Coast because they're now standing up and saying, hey, we're united as one against Iran. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. So that's something to remember. But I want to reference you. So there's a lot of dispute. How well will Israel do if there's an attack, if they do an attack on the Iranian facilities? And there's a dispute. So there was a front page article in Israel Hayom the other day. This is an article in this morning's New York Times. Israeli defense officials cast doubt on threat to hit Iran's nuclear programs. So some people are ready to go, and some people say that some people say we're ready to go, we can do this, we'll go now. Other people are saying, I don't know if you can do this. One of the pilots involved in attacking the reactor in Iraq in 1981, I can't believe it's been 40 years ago, said, what you have now is, back then you had one Iraqi reactor. In Syria you had one reactor. But now you have all of these hardened sites across Israel. This is Natanz, or across Iran. This is Natanz. And there are some people say we don't have the weapon capability, short of using one that would certainly lead to a world war, that type of weapon. We don't have the weapons to hit the underground facilities. And Iran posts pictures of their underground missile bases and that type of thing. So it's a much, much more difficult problem than anybody really wants to admit. And Meir Ben Shabbat, who is a member of the Israeli INSS, Institute for National Security Studies, which is a good think tank in Israel, does a lot of good conferences and everything. He has an article, front page of Israel Hayom on Thursday. And essentially what he's saying here, let me pull up the article, I'll give you the English title. You can just type in his name, Meir, M-E-I-R, Ben, B-E-N hyphen Shabbat, like Shabbat. And you can read that article. The title of the article is, The Iranian Threat Cannot Be Overstated or Underestimated. While Israel's strategic standing is solid, it is also fragile. Domestic challenges, including internal strife, diminished governability, and rising crime rates are disturbing warning signs, and above all, hovers the peril of the Ayatollah's regime. If they sense the end is near, Iran could eye a nuclear strike. And the problem is, and I'll play a little bit of a clip of Caroline and David Wormser talking about this in their talk this week on Caroline's podcast. The problem is that Iran gave up its enriched uranium. And everybody says, oh, that's so good, that's so good. But what they've done is they continued to develop centrifuges. And so now, well, David Wormser will say in this clip, if I play enough of it, that the centrifuges are 20 to 90 times faster than they were. So if they're 20 times faster, that means what took them 20 months to enrich can now be done in a month. If it's 90 times, it can be done in a week or less than a week. And so while they're having these talks in Vienna, and Iran appears to have no interest in solving this or entering into any kind of agreement, all the while they're continuing to advance their nuclear program, they're getting closer and closer to a breakout. And then the question becomes, what are we going to do about it? Israel has some logistical problems with that. They're going to continue to do the strike here, strike there, strike here, strike there, and try to disrupt things. But the problem, as people have noted, is, well, we attack Natanz, and so they build back better in Natanz at the nuclear facility in Iran. They put things underground, so it's harder to attack. So this is a big problem, and Iran is a big existential threat, not just to Israel, but also to the U.S. Article in Israel Hayom, I think this morning, talks about the fact that they're becoming a drone power, this asymmetrical warfare. And this is a big deal. And this is my view on this and how this plays into end times. I know that, we need great company and mighty armies and that type of thing in this attack that comes against Israel. And I don't see the army being strong enough to do that. But now when you throw in cheap asymmetrical warfare like drone armies, drone air forces, I think it just accelerates that possibility. That's my view. Because I think this thing might be closer than we think, even though logistically it seems a ways off, but now you have this development of technology and AI and that type of thing. And these are remote, you don't need an army to have a drone army of planes. You have to have some guys to control them sitting at a computer, but you don't need to be out there exposing themselves to being killed. So this is a game changer. Here's Caroline and David talking about the Iranian threat, and we'll close with this.
All right. Well, one thing that he did say there, which I think it was overblown, but he did say that the most important thing that he did for Israel was leave the Iran nuclear deal, and that if he hadn't been president, then Israel would have been
talking
annihilated.
Talking about Trump.
Which is the hyperbole. But I do think that leaving the Iran nuclear deal was, if we've already discussed the Jerusalem recognition and even the Golan Heights recognition of Israeli sovereignty as being, just really a brilliant strategic move, mainly because you don't have to pay anything and you get the most bang for your non-buck as you can possibly imagine, just by recognizing reality and taking away the hope of Israel's enemies and America's enemies that they're going to be able to destroy Israel or deny its right to exist. The leaving the Iran nuclear deal was something else. It was a very significant strategic move, and when we're looking at it in the context of the Biden administration's policies and even the Bennett, Lapid, Gantz government's policies on Iran, and how they're struggling and how the Americans are struggling to go back to that deal, I think that his statement is borne out to some degree. What do you make of it? How do you look at it in the context of what's happening today?
Yeah, look, I think it was one of the most important moves of the Trump administration. Again, one I think that the Trump administration deserves very high praise for was leaving the nuclear deal. The problem was the follow-on and what that meant. Again, you could go one of two routes once you leave the nuclear deal. You could believe that there was another deal to be had, but that it would be grounded on very sober and restrictive terms with the Iranians. In other words, a real deal, a real meaningful deal, or alternatively that no deal is possible and that other policies have to be pursued with Iran, which is hell-bent, whether it's in a deal or not within a deal, for nuclear weapons. So the fundamental policy question afterwards, I think the Trump administration, Trump himself, again, with his belief that he can negotiate in a way that nobody else can, I think believed that another nuclear deal was possible and that it was much, much tougher. So the toughness of the Trump administration on Iran was geared toward destabilizing the regime, leaning on the regime, creating such a threat to the regime that it constitutes sufficient leverage for them to buckle and come back under a very tough deal that more effectively controls their program. I think that was a schizophrenia in American policy that sounds reasonable, that you do that, and hey, if the Iranian regime falls along the way, because we were so tough. Well, that's not bad either. So it seemed to be a no-lose type situation. But the truth is those policies are contradictory. The moment that you suggest that you're after a deal, and any deal, even a really tough deal in the end, you're signaling the Iranian people that they're a pawn, that their freedom, that their attempt to get rid of their government is meaningless to you, and that at the end you'll sell them out. The more the Iranian regime is threatened, maybe the better off it'll be with a nuclear deal, but the Iranian people themselves will be sold out. So they were limited in how far they would go because they felt.
So what he's saying is, listen, we have contradictory policies. We want to get rid of the Iranian regime, so we're pressure there, but then we want to pressure them into this deal, which you'll make a deal with the Iranian regime. And so the question is, which one do you want? Do you want to get rid of the regime or do you want to get the deal with the regime? And so it's a tough policy. Now, they do think, I think in this clip, they will eventually say that if Trump had stayed in power, that there was a chance that the Iranian regime could have collapsed because of the sanctions and things that were put on them. But that's all gone now. That's kind of all irrelevant. And Caroline's question is, given the way Trump is kind of acting vis-a-vis Netanyahu, and he did say things like, I'm more popular, people love me in Israel. And he just, sometimes he doesn't have the filter that he needs to be diplomatic. We all love, the mean tweets at times, but there's sometimes where you have to be a little bit circumspect as president or a former president. And he may have crossed some lines this week. And so the question that the people in Israel are asking is, what does this mean if Trump gets reelected in 2024? Because what's he going to do? Because we don't even know if he's on our side in some respects, particularly if he wants to get this Palestinian state. So this whole thing back and forth involving supposedly the world's superpower, this is kind of interesting. And I even talked about Ukraine and what's going on there. That is a very volatile situation with Russia on the border of Ukraine. Tens of thousands of troops, and maybe 5 times that number are available to be transported there in pretty short order. That would be 700,000 troops. Are we going to go to war over Ukraine? There were reports today that tanks were being sent from Europe, U.S. tanks being sent from Europe to Ukraine. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. It's a very volatile world. Things could change very, very rapidly, regardless of all the stuff that's going on with, the World Economic Forum, artificial intelligence, the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector L19er. This is a chaotic world that we live in right now. So listen, we need to be grounded in the Word. We need to be in prayer. I would encourage you. I have a nephew, as I said, who's in the hospital, struggling. I have many friends who've contacted me on Facebook and elsewhere who are struggling with the after effects of the Delta variant or whatever they got sick with. And they have long, long roads to recovery, months of rehab. And then I had a couple of friends who in the last couple of weeks have lost dearly beloved spouses to this thing. So it's a tough world to live in, but I'm at peace because I know where my hope lies and where my future lies. So let's keep that in mind. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for the day. We pray that you'll bless us as we go this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel. Keep us in prayer. Keep us in your word as we deal with the things that are being sent our way by the condition of the world today. We look forward to your return. In Jesus' name, amen.